Center for Biostatistics. And so I thought it was kind of funny this morning when Dr. Hall was talking about grant writing that he said that he couldn't think of a topic that was more simultaneously boring yet terrifying than grant writing. Well, I was kind of laughing because I bet statistics could give grant writing a run for its money. At least I'm sure you guys think so. So today we're going to talk about the role of statisticians in research. But what you might not know is that's not the actual title of the talk we have for you today. The actual title of our talk is Wizards, Robots, and Biostatisticians, Separating Fact from Fiction. There's actually should have been some sound with that, so I'm hoping that, we can get that fixed later on. But despite that, you might be thinking and seeing that, wow, that's an interesting title. Maybe this won't be your typical boring talk about statistics. Right? Well, unfortunately, you'd be wrong. We're just statisticians. We are not accomplished public speakers, and I hate to break it to you, but the jokes only go downhill from here on. But despite our limitations, I do hope you will stick with us through this talk, because while the topic of statistics may not be the most interesting for researchers, it nevertheless is still critically important. In fact, in 2000, the New England Journal of Medicine published a list of what they consider to be the top 11 most important medical developments in the past millennium. And guess what made the list? At number 4, application of statistics to medicine. Now, we're all here today because we're interested in research. So I know that everyone here in the room is convinced of the value of the scientific method, correct? As researchers, we require proof. Strong empirical evidence for us to accept a scientific claim. And how do we obtain that strong empirical evidence? Well, ideally, it should be through the proper analysis and interpretation of data that have been collected from a carefully designed experiment. In other words, through statistics. So the application of statistics is at the very core of the scientific method. So I think everyone in the room, hopefully we can all agree on the need for statistics in research. But what might not be so clear-cut is the need for statisticians in research. Why do you need statisticians for your research? After all, today's statistical software is readily available. And a very popular example is Excel. I've been working here at Ohio State as a statistician for almost 15 years. And in that time, I would say that almost every single researcher I've worked with at one time or another has used Excel for entering data, getting summaries like means and standard deviations, making box plots and things like that, and even doing statistics like t-tests, correlations, regression. But you don't have to be even confined to Excel. There are many other choices of software out there for you that is very easy to use and does not require any kind of complicated programming knowledge. And in fact, in many cases, you don't even need software. You can just go online and enter your data directly. So thanks to technology today, with very minimal training, pretty much anyone can do their own statistics. But I have to ask, is this really a good idea? Well, because statistical software is so readily available and so easy to use, I think it's easy to forget that in actuality, these are very powerful tools. And to be honest, I get a little nervous when I see people using very powerful tools without being fully and properly trained. Sometimes a little knowledge can actually be a dangerous thing, kind of leading to unfortunate results. Now, I'm sure you're all thinking, well, of course you're going to say that. You're a statistician. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is that there's a growing awareness of a real problem in research today, and that is the problem of irreproducible study results. That is, having scientific findings that can be neither replicated nor validated, and the real worry that the majority of positive results today will turn out to be actually false positives, scientific dead ends that waste time, money, and resources. So here's a recent example. This article was published in the journal Cortex just this year in May 2015. Its sole purpose was to try and validate the results from 5 previous studies that looked at so-called SBB correlations, structural brain behavior correlations, or as I understand it, relationships between the brain's structure, anatomy, with behavior and cognition. What did they find? The 5 studies we attempted to replicate contained a total of 17 of these correlations. The results from our confirmatory analyses show that we were unable to successfully replicate any of these 17 correlations. Now, I have to say that just because the original study results could not be replicated does not automatically make them false or invalid. But it does raise legitimate concerns about the reliability of any study that we read, particularly because as researchers, I think we have a tendency to treat study results that have been published in reputable peer-reviewed journals as valid or indicative of the truth. But the real truth is that not even well-regarded studies are immune from this problem. Here's another example. This paper was published in 2008 in JCEM, the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. This was an NHLBI-funded study that found a link between polycystic ovary syndrome in postmenopausal women and cardiovascular disease. According to Google, when I looked this up, it's been cited over 300 times. And yet, just this year, the authors withdrew their study due to their inability to replicate the original study results. So the problem of irreproducible results is real and unfortunately pervasive in today's research. It's not enough simply to get your results published. Okay? So why is this happening? Well, it's a complicated problem, and obviously there are multiple causes. But I'm going to focus on one major contributing factor today with an example. So how many of you here in this room have heard about the study linking dark chocolate and weight loss? Anyone? Okay, so a few of you are familiar with this. You know the punchline. But for the rest of you, let me give you the setup here. This study was conducted by a group of researchers in Germany. They took study participants and they randomized them into 3 diet groups. There was a low-carb diet plus 1.5 ounces of dark chocolate daily. So roughly, it's like eating a candy bar, okay? And an unrestricted diet group to serve as a control. Okay, they followed the participants for 2 weeks. They took measurements, blood, questionnaires, etc. And what did they find? Lo and behold, they found that the group that had chocolate lost significantly more weight than the low-carb diet alone. Okay? And as expected, the control group did not show any significant changes in weight. In addition, the chocolate group had higher personal well-being scores and lower bad cholesterol. Okay, pretty cool. This study was published just at the beginning of this year, and the results quickly made it on the internet and were touted in such magazines as Shape and Prevention. Okay? Now I have to tell you, as a chocolate lover, this is fantastic news, isn't it? I mean, especially think about what time of year it is. Trick-or-treating is next year, and so there's lots of candy. I can steal all the dark chocolate from my kids and be set for life here. In fact, it sounds a little too good to be true, doesn't it? The fact that you can eat dark chocolate and lose weight. Well, guess what? It was. As it turns out, this study was a hoax. And the lead author was actually a journalist who, together with a group, published a deliberately flawed article in order to make a statement about the current state of research, particularly in the field of nutrition and journalism. Okay? So the funny thing is, when I first heard about this study and heard it was a hoax, I assumed that they had faked the entire thing. But what's interesting is that this was a real study. They took actual participants who actually followed the diets, and the weight loss seen in the chocolate group was real. But I said this was a hoax. So what was so wrong about this study? Well, it turns out that the flaws in this study were statistical. Here's from the confessional from the main author. Here's a dirty little science secret. If you measure a large number of things about a small number of people, you are almost guaranteed to get a statistically significant result. Our study included 18 different measurements from 15 people. That study design is a recipe for false positives. So in other words, the authors of the study engaged in a practice of what I like to call fishing, or searching for significance. And that is so easy to do today because thanks to technology, we have the ability to collect a tremendous amount of information about our study subjects of interest, correct? Multiple outcomes, targets, genetics, demographics. But then we start testing all of those outcomes, targets, demographics between our groups, and then latch onto the ones that have p-values less than 0.05 as evidence that there are clinically meaningful differences without taking into account the fact that the more tests we perform, the more likely our significant results are due to chance alone. Okay, that's called phishing. As a side note, phishing can also occur even if you have a very well-defined primary outcome that happens to be not statistically significant between your groups. So what can happen? Well, it's very tempting to say, well, my outcome wasn't significant between my primary groups of interest, but what if I looked at just the females or the high-risk patients? Or what if I just took samples that met a particular profile? In other words, you start searching for that perfect subgroup where you might find that p less than 0.05. Okay? Phishing, whether deliberate or unintentional, is unfortunately very common in today's research. Now, I have to emphasize that this study was a hoax, not real. But it's funny how sometimes life imitates art. About the same time that the chocolate study was making waves, another very interesting claim was being promoted on the internet and in journals. Okay, this last example is from the Washington Post, and I'm sure you can tell from the pictures it's going to be good. Let me read you from one of the articles. A new study shows that a burger and fries from McDonald's is just as good at helping the body recover from exercise as scientifically engineered energy supplements. Okay, sounds pretty fantastic, doesn't it? Now, at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned how, as researchers, we require strong empirical evidence. So let's examine the evidence behind this claim here. Here's the original study on which those claims are based. This is not a hoax. This is a legitimate study that was just published this year. The researchers looked at 11 male athletes. They gave them both fast food as well as traditional energy supplements after strenuous exercise. They found no statistically significant differences in any of the outcomes. Based on that, they concluded that fast food was just as good as energy supplements. Now, I have to ask you, as researchers, do you feel that this is very strong evidence? No? Why?
It's a very small sample size.
Okay, guess what? You just earned a bar of chocolate. There you go. So, yes, absolutely. So, let me tell you what concerns me as a statistician. The claim that fast food is the same or equivalent to energy supplements is based on the fact that they did not find statistically significant differences. But with only 11 subjects, it's also possible that they were simply underpowered to detect a clinically meaningful difference. In other words, they made the mistake of equating lack of statistical significance with proving equivalence or equality. Now, it's possible that in the future that this study will be replicated, validated, and proven to be correct. But it's way too premature to be posting articles saying that we should be dropping those energy supplements and lining up at our favorite fast food restaurant. What a shame. All these great things, fast food, chocolate, okay. Now, in 2012, there was an editorial in circulation talking about the problem of irreproducible experimental results. And in that article, they said that statistical flaws are a major cause of irreproducible results in all types of biomedical experimentation. These include errors in trial design, data analysis, and data interpretation. Now, I believe that these statistical flaws are an unintended byproduct of what I like to call the Wild West culture of research. So as researchers, we have a lot of freedom today in how we choose to conduct our research. You have many choices in how you design your experiments, how you collect your data, and how you analyze your data. You have many tools available for you. And there have been many wonderful advances and discoveries as a result of that freedom. But the freedom we enjoy can also be dangerous because it leaves the door open for bad statistical practices to flourish. Nature devoted a whole special to the problem of irreproducible research in 2012. And I want to quote from one of the articles that they had in this special called Errorprone. They state, the biologists must seek relevant training in experimental methods and collaborate with good statisticians. Okay? So I hope that the slides I presented so far have given you a little food for thought about the problem of irreproducible research, how bad statistics are a major culprit in the problem of irreproducible research, and therefore why you really do need good statisticians as members of your research team. Okay? Now, you're probably all wondering at this point what any of this has to do with that really interesting title of our talk, correct? Well, wonder no longer. I'm going to now hand it over to my colleague Allison, who's going to talk about some of the misconceptions that researchers may have about statisticians. Allison?
All right, so wizards and robots and biostatisticians. Like Amy said, what does any of this have to do with what she just talked about and the problem of irreproducible research today? So, and here's where we kind of got this from. Because we might not be super great about communicating exactly what we do when we go back to our offices and do our work, there might be some misconceptions that have sort of arisen about what a biostatistician is. And the two most common misconceptions that we see are the biostatistician is a wizard or they're a robot. And let's talk a little bit about what these ideas mean. Okay, so the wizard. So someone who thinks a biostatistician is a wizard might sort of have this idea that the wizard can fix any problem. If you have bad data, missing data, a flawed design, anything, don't worry about it. The statistician can fix it with this sorcery of theirs. So according to the wizard view, you don't really have to worry about the design of the study or how the data are collected, because it can all just be fixed in the end, right? Well, even a real wizard would tell you that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Another point of view that someone who thinks the statistician is a wizard might have is, I have no idea what they're doing. It's all magic. I'm going to let them do it. If you ever feel this way and you're collaborating with a statistician, ask them, because we want you to collaborate with us, and we want you to understand what we're doing, and we really want to understand what you're doing as well. So that's sort of the wizard idea. Alternatively, there's sort of the extreme opposite, that the biostatistician is a robot. So if you have this point of view, you think, well, the robot can just push a button, you got to know which buttons to push, and you'll get p-values, and they can just sort of crank out like an assembly line. So according to the robot point of view, analyzing the data shouldn't take any time at all. And we have a fun clip here to sort of portray this. I don't think sound is working, unfortunately. Yeah, it's on all the way. Whoops. But we'll show it to you anyway. There's actually subtitles. So basically, this is a clip from Star Trek, and you'll see that computers solve everything.
Computer. Ready. Produce all data relevant to the recent ion storm. Correlate following hypothesis. Could a storm of such magnitude cause a power surge in the transporter circuits, creating a momentary interdimensional contact with a parallel universe? Affirmative. At such a moment, could persons in each universe, in the act of beaming, transpose with their counterparts in the other universe? Affirmative. Could conditions necessary to such an event be created artificially using the ship's power? Affirmative. Record procedure. Scotty, can you do it?
All right. And I'm really glad to hear people laughing, because that means that you see how sort of absurd this is. They're asking these really complicated questions, and the computer just responds. They push a button, they get the answer, and it's as easy as that. And sometimes I kind of wish that's how it was. I wish we had one of these computers in the office, but that's just not the case. So another point of view, if you think the statistician is the robot, is we just need to run a canned procedure from a program, and it's essentially knowing which program and procedure to pick out. Or maybe statistics are essentially interchangeable between projects. We can just reuse them. And this is sort of the statistical equivalent of sharing someone's prescription medication. It could be fine, but it could be really disastrous, and nobody in the medical profession would ever recommend it, because the consequences could be really unfortunate. Okay, so these are sort of the myths that we think have arisen and we've sort of seen before. So now we want to talk about what we actually want you to know moving forward. Okay, so number one, as I said before, we want to be involved as active, contributing members of the research team. What does that mean? So I think our first presenter, when he was talking about grant writing tips, he said something like, start early, give yourself plenty of time, have people, read your grant or your protocol, whatever it may be, and give them time. And that applies to us as well. You need time to do your best work, and so do we. We cannot usually crank out an analysis plan or a design or any of that with, a couple of days' notice. We really need to be able to digest the work and think about what we're doing and present the best way to analyze these data. Oops. Oops, sorry. Moving forward here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the research timeline. So everybody should be pretty familiar with this. We sort of start with generating the hypothesis. Then once you have an idea, you do the design and planning. You submit it, whether it be to an IRB or to a granting agency. Hopefully it gets approved. And then you get to run the experiment, collect the data, and then when you're done with that, you do the analyses and you disseminate the results, either through presentations or manuscripts. So where do you think statisticians should fit in here? Most people are going to involve us in the end, right? The analyses are being done, and of course, this is a logical place for us to be involved. And we do want to be involved here. But we don't want it to be the first time we're involved. We want to be involved from the very beginning. As soon as you have that idea and you start thinking about your design and your research hypotheses, we want to be there to help redefine those and plan everything out. And we also want to have time, so we don't want to be brought in too late, because sometimes if you bring us in sort of towards the end of everything, if a lot of decisions have been made about how the study is going to be done and how you're going to collect data, sometimes there could be a problem that we see, and it might be too late to fix it depending on when we're brought in. So the very beginning is when we want to be sort of involved. Okay. And I think sort of a good way to describe this is the collaborator versus the service provider. So we've all probably gone to a fast food restaurant. We want a hamburger, we want a chicken sandwich, whatever. And we order our food, and they give it to us, and we pay them, and we walk away. That's the end of the transaction. So you might think that that's how it works with statisticians too. You come to us with your data, and we do an analysis, and we give you p-values, and you walk away, and that's the end of the transaction. And that's really what we want to avoid here. We want to be involved as the collaborator. We're so much more than p-values. And I know that that's the first thing people usually think about when you think of a statistician, unless you picture like a dusty old guy with elbow patches like at a chalkboard. But we do so much more, as you saw in the previous slide. We really want to build a relationship with you, which involves communication consistently throughout the entire study. So number two, we're really interested in understanding the science behind the research. Like I said earlier, we want to be involved from the beginning, and part of that is going to be us understanding what you want to do and why you want to do it, because that's really going to help us design the study and our analysis plan ultimately. So it's more than just numbers on a spreadsheet, basically, is what we're trying to really get down to. So if you give us a spreadsheet and you say, I want to compare A and B, I don't want to know just A and B. I want to know what is A, what's B, why do you want to compare them? Where did these data come from, and what's happened so far with the data? What steps have been taken to get from the initial design and data collection to where we are now? Because a lot of times there's some sort of steps in between, like cleaning and maybe throwing out outliers and things like that, and we really want to know what's happened. Like I said before, the correct analyses need to take into account the entire design of the study. So that's another thing we need to know. Was this randomized? Was the randomization stratified? What was the inclusion-exclusion criteria? That's really, it sounds odd, but it's really things that we need to know. So meeting with statisticians to discuss your project design is really beneficial to you. It should really be helpful, and we might ask questions, and hopefully we'll get you thinking about things. So please talk to us before the data are collected, because we can really help avoid design flaws that can doom an experiment. And these things do happen. Things like bad randomization. I myself have worked on a study where they did the randomization scheme themselves. And basically they wrote control and treatment on a bunch of envelopes, and they put them together and they just picked them out. And they only came to us because their first 10 patients were all on the control, and they were kind of panicking. They're like, why do we not have any patients in the treatment group? Well, because that's not really the way to do randomization, and we have sort of methods and ways to go about ensuring an even distribution within each group. Maybe having an inappropriate control group, something that we can try to help avoid. Collecting key variables in a way that makes analysis difficult or forgetting important information, kind of not a no-no. An adequate sample size. The last thing you want to do is design your study and run it and do an analysis, and you find out, if only we would have collected more people. We can try to give you a reasonable sample size that will basically give us enough power to test the differences that we're trying to look for. Or maybe problems with data capture. And I actually think we have someone talking later about data capture, so I'm sure he'll have some input on that. Okay. We're not trying to make your lives harder. Let me emphasize this one more time. We are not trying to make your lives harder. Because sometimes I think people think this. They come to us with a protocol or data or whatever it may be, and we start asking questions. And sometimes I think people want to hand us a copy of this book. Like, don't sweat the small stuff. It's okay. It's all small stuff. But unfortunately, our goal is always to do good science. We want to avoid running into issues that Amy talked about earlier. We don't want that to happen to us or any of you. So that's why we sort of might start asking questions. So if we suggest changes, highlight potential problems, we're really doing it in order to make the research better. So please take advantage of our expertise. I'm going to give you an example of how our involvement has sort of been fruitful for an investigator. So once upon a time, in a land not so far away, because this happened here at OSU, there was an R01 submitted. There was no biostatistician involved, and it scored above the 20th percentile. So it wasn't going to be funded. And one of the criticisms was it lacked a statistician and an analysis plan. So the investigators contacted a statistician, and they worked closely to revise the proposal. And when they submitted it for review again, the reviews came back, and they were really positive. In fact, this is a screen capture of one of the comments. They said, several of the weaknesses noted in the prior review were impressively addressed in this resubmission, also garnered praise. In particular, the resubmission is bolstered with the addition of the biostatistician. No, not the analysis plan, the biostatistician. The person involved with this work brought a lot to the table. Again, these are direct quotes. So as statistician, so-and-so brings a very significant expertise in statistical analyses of both preclinical and clinical data that will be critical for the proposed research project. And this statistical analysis plans and statisticians' very significant expertise will be extremely helpful for the proposed research project. So again, it's not just the stuff that they wrote out, it's the person, it's their background and their experience. And guess what? There was a really happy ending here. It scored in the first percentile. It can't get any better. So this was funded. So that's really a happy ending here. Yay. And this is a true story. We didn't make this up for purposes of this presentation. This is legitimate. So basically, in conclusion, statistics is so much more than pushing buttons and getting p-values. And bad stats are really a major culprit in the problem of irreproducible research today. And that can include any of these: design, analysis, interpretation. If you have two of these and you don't have the third, you're probably in trouble. And we really want to be involved as collaborators with your research. Okay, so now I've got you really excited. You want to work with a statistician. We're obviously a really fun bunch of people, and we do good work. How do you get in touch with us? Here's our website, and then you can email us at biostatistics@osumc.edu. Or if any of you already know a statistician from our group or from elsewhere, you can always contact us directly. That's okay too. So thanks for your time, and we wanted to thank the CCTS for their funds to support this talk. Does anybody have any questions? Mm-hmm.
But I get the impression that biostatisticians at most get maybe second author.
Mm-hmm.
So if I, as a young investigator, want to collaborate with a young statistician, how important is it for your career to be first author on a paper or shared author, or does it not really matter?
So I think that's sort of an interesting question. Amy, you might have some thoughts on that. So typically, we are involved as an author, but you're right. Usually, being sort of the main author is not, is not something that we're necessarily concerned with, unless we sort of have a position that is like a professor or something along those lines. We are specifically collaborative statisticians within our group, and so I think that's that's pretty common and acceptable, and it's not something that I would worry myself about as being first author. We are there as collaborators.
Right. But on the same token, I think the whole idea of as statisticians, we want to be involved as collaborators, not merely just kind of giving you a table of p-values. So a lot of times we've helped not only with the design of the study, but with the analysis, as well as substantial help in the writing as well. So we do believe that that merits co-authorship as well. But in terms of first author, obviously, no. So, any other questions?